There are years of your life you will never get back. Not because they were boring, because they were erased. Somewhere, there are people who remember holding you for the first time. They remember the sound you made, the weight of you, the way you grabbed a finger and refused to let go. You remember none of it. Sit with that for a moment. The first 3 years of your life are gone. Not blurry, not faint, gone. You learned to walk, you learned faces, you learned to love the people who fed you, and almost none of it survived. Try it right now. Reach back as far as you can and find your very first memory. For most people, it lands around age 3, a flash of a birthday, a dog, a moment standing in a kitchen. And before that line, there is almost nothing. A wall. Why is the wall always in the same place? For a long time, the answer seemed obvious. A baby's brain is too undeveloped to record anything. Nothing was stored, so nothing was lost. Case closed. But the real answer is far stranger. Your infant brain was not a blank tape. It was recording constantly. Newborns recognize their mother's voice within days of being born. They learn that one face means food and another sound means comfort. Some of the fastest, most important learning a human being will ever do happens in those first years. And then, the record of it vanishes.
Consider what one researcher proved decades ago. Carolyn Rovey Collier wanted to know if babies could remember, so she tied a ribbon from an infant's ankle to a colorful mobile hanging above the crib. The babies, some only 2 or 3 months old, quickly figured out that kicking made the mobile dance. That was learning. But here is the part that matters. When she brought the same mobile back days, even weeks later, the babies kicked immediately. They remembered.
A 2-month-old held a memory long enough to use it again. So the idea that infants store nothing is simply wrong. They store plenty. Then they lose it. The man who first gave this a name was Sigmund Freud. More than a century ago, he noticed that his patients could rarely recall anything from before the age of 3, and he called it infantile amnesia. Freud had his own strange ideas about why it happened, and most of them did not survive. But the name stuck, and the mystery he pointed at is still being studied today. What kind of forgetting erases the most important years of a life and leaves the rest intact? Here is where it gets uncomfortable. Carol Peterson, a researcher at Memorial University, ran a study so simple it is almost unsettling. She and her team asked young children, some only 4 or 5, about their earliest memories. The children could often describe real events from when they were 2, verifiable ones, things their parents confirmed had happened. Then she waited. She came back years later and asked the same children the same question. And the early memories were gone. The children had quietly forgotten the very things they had once described in detail. The forgetting was not instant. It crept in as they grew older. Patricia Bauer at Emory University watched the same thing happen up close. Her work showed that very young children can absolutely form memories, but those memories are fragile and they decay far faster than an adult's. There is a window. Early memories form, survive for a while, and then most of them dissolve before they can ever become permanent. Childhood is not a time when nothing is remembered. It is a time when memory has not yet learned how to hold on. So your brain was writing the whole time. The question that should keep you up at night is why it erased its own file. The most startling clue comes from deep inside the brain itself. There is a small, curved structure tucked in the center of your head called the hippocampus. Think of it as the part of you that turns a passing moment into a memory you can return to later. It is the librarian. In an infant, that librarian is still being hired and trained, and it is doing something that, from memory, looks almost like self-sabotage. It is growing new brain cells at a furious rate. This process has a name, neurogenesis. It just means the birth of new neurons. It sounds like nothing but good news. More cells, more power, a bigger brain.
But two neuroscientists found the hidden cost.
Working at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto, Paul Franklin and Sheena Jocelyn studied this flood of new cells in young brains. The new neurons do not sit politely beside the old ones. They wire themselves into the existing network. They rearrange the circuitry. And every time the circuit is rewired, the memories stored in the old pattern get harder to find. Picture writing a sentence on a page and then drawing thousands of fresh lines across that page every single day. The sentence is still there underneath. You simply cannot read it anymore. Their experiments were striking. When they slowed the growth of new neurons in young animals, early memories survived longer. When they sped that growth up in adults, the animals began forgetting things they normally would have kept. The forgetting was not a glitch. It was being caused by the growth itself. Your brain traded away your earliest memories in exchange for the raw ability to build itself. That is the twist most people never hear. You did not lose those years by accident. You paid for them. The price of becoming who you are was forgetting who you were. But there is another layer, quieter and just as strange. Think about how you actually remember anything now. You remember in stories. First this happened, then that happened, and here is what it meant to me. A memory like that needs language. It needs a sense of self, a me that events happen to. And a baby has neither, not fully formed. So even when an experience lands, there is nothing solid to hang it on. Researchers like Catherine Nelson and Robin Fivish spent years untangling how children learn to remember their own lives. What they found is that autobiographical memory, the kind that builds the running story of who you are, switches on through conversation. When a parent kneels down and says, "Remember when we went to the beach? What did we see? How did that feel?" The child is being taught, gently and without knowing it, how to package an experience into a story worth keeping. Until you have the words and the self to hold it, the moment simply washes through you and leaves no handle behind. So a baby feels everything and keeps almost none of it. Not because the feelings were weak, because there was no story yet to keep them in. Now, here is the part that should stay with you long after this video ends. Those vanished years were not wasted. They may have been the most important years you will ever live. In them, your brain wired itself together faster than it ever will again. You learned, beneath any words, whether the world was safe or whether it wasn't. You learned whether crying brought someone running or brought silence. You learned whether you were wanted. None of those lessons came stamped with a memory you can call up, and every one of them is still running inside you right now. The way you flinch or soften when someone raises their voice, the way you reach for people or quietly pull back, the background hum of whether the world feels like a trustworthy place or a dangerous one. A great deal of that was set in the years you cannot recall. You are, in a very real sense, shaped by a story you were never allowed to read. That is the strange gift buried inside infantile amnesia. You do not remember being held as an infant. But if you were held, if you were soothed, if you were safe, you may still carry the exact shape of it, in how easily you trust, in how well you sleep, in how you walk into a room full of strangers. The memory is gone, the imprint stayed. So when you look at an old photograph of yourself as a baby and feel like you are staring at a stranger, you are not wrong. That little person did things you will never recall, in a body you have completely replaced, with a brain that deliberately erased its own first chapter to make room for the rest of the book. And yet that stranger is the entire reason you exist at all. Every safe choice and every fear you cannot explain traces back to a chapter you will never get to read. Doesn't that change how you look at the photo? There are years of your life you will never get back. You didn't lose them. You were built out of them.